Cuello, thank you so much for joining me here on Walking Inside Poems.
Really happy to be here, John. Thank you.
Yeah, looking forward to talking about Diane Seuss. This is the first episode, probably of many I'll have on her. I don't know what you think, but I think she's probably one of the most important voices in contemporary American poetry. Would you agree with that?
100%. Three of her books are on my top five list of favorite books.
I know this is one of them.
That's one of them.
I
Yeah.
know, I know this is one of them.
Yes. And then the third is modern poetry, which is her newest. Yes.
Yeah, I got you covered there. Well, we're gonna choose a poem out of this book. One of the things that we should say ahead of time, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself because I want you to introduce yourself, but let me go ahead and complete the thought. You know, a lot of books of poetry are sort of just collections. There isn't any particular, at least obvious thread between the poems. This poem is this book. It's kind of we will take one poem out of context, but I think it's important for listeners and readers to know that this is there's a lot of this is called Still Life with Two Dead Peacocks and a Girl, which is the name of a Rembrandt painting, by the way. But there's many poems in here that are self-portrait with the ashes of my baby blanket, self-portrait with my dad looming behind me. Of course, Still Life with Two Dead Peacocks and a Girl. Um, Self-portrait with Emily Dickinson, self-portrait with Sylvia Plath's Braid, which is the poem we're going to talk about today. So there's a way, I think, in which these poems work together, speak to each other, have some sort of unifying themes going on. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. I think she's one reason she's an interesting poet. Her poems do this. Her poems do the same thing that her books do, which is they seem to meander and they move very freely and they touch on many things. But there's a kind of return in them that draws on memory, that draws on dream. And it's so brilliant that you don't realize it's happening because there's so much wildness to her work and it,
Yes.
it goes in so many places, but it has a deep cohesion. And I think one reason I love her work is it mimics life experience, it mimics the mind, because this is how we move and yet we return to our obsessions.
Hmm. And there's a sort of irreverence about her. There's sort of a little bit of I can't believe I'm going to say this because I sort of hate it, but a little bit of a rock and roll kind of uh, feel about her sometimes. Maybe goth, I don't know. That's probably not right, but then she's brilliant. I mean, that's the thing. When I first read her poetry, that's the thing that stuck out to me, and it's hard to describe or define why, but you just know when you read this poem, this person is brilliant. There's just something about her that comes right through those words. But I love the fact that she's got Rembrandt in her poems, but she's also got Janis Joplin and she's got Freddie Mercury, you know, Emily Dickinson, as well as Amy Winehouse. I mean, it's sort of like it's all in here, you know. Jessica, let's back up here and let me ask you to introduce yourself to our listeners and just tell us who you are and how you got to where you are today.
Well, I'm Jessica Cuello. I'm a poet. I'm also a public school teacher. This is year 29.
What grade level?
I currently teach high school French. I've taught English also. I actually taught in Texas for 11 years in
Where?
San Antonio. San Antonio.
Okay.
Yeah, now I teach in central New York, near Syracuse, which is where I live.
Hmm. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in central New York. I was born in Geneva, New York, and I went to high school in the city of Syracuse. I went to college in New York City, and I married a Texan, and I got married very young, which is why I ended up in San Antonio.
Hmm. But now you're back in New York, back home.
Mm. Yes.
How often do you get down to the city?
Maybe twice a year, once a year to visit
Uh-huh.
friends.
I, I just had this idea that, I like to visit New York at least once a year, and my daughter is actually living there, auditioning. She's musical theater. Been there now about a year and a half, and she's auditioning and living the life. Just ecstatic to be doing so. But I want to go visit her a lot. But even before she was there, I would go at least once a year. I called them my jazz trips to go, to see the greatest musicians in the world play at little clubs like the Vanguard. And I just had this crazy notion, I'm sure it's wrong, that if I lived where you lived, it would be hard not to go down there every month or something like that. Did you do that for a while or no? Or you never did that?
I mean, certainly New York is smaller than Texas, but it's actually about a 5-hour drive. And if you take the train, it can take longer. Usually it stops in Albany for 45 minutes. It's a beautiful train ride. It goes right down the Hudson River. If you sit on the right side, I always sit on the right side, you can see the river right at your shoulder the whole way. Um, I don't like driving a whole lot, so I don't like driving into the city. Um, and because I teach, you know, I don't have a lot of time.
Yeah.
But
I'll
I
bet.
think, I mean, it's a good case, a total tangent, but it's a good argument for high-speed rail. Like there should be a train that you can just get down there in an hour.
Yeah. Well, I'll bet that train ride down the Hudson is really particularly beautiful this time of year. Okay. Well, you chose Self-Portrait with Sylvia Plath's Braid from this book here. And let me start us off by reading it, and then let's talk about it. Self-Portrait with Sylvia Plath's Braid. Some women make a pilgrimage to visit it in the Indiana Library, charged to keep it safe. I didn't drive to it, I dreamed it. The thick braid roped over my hands, heavier than lead. My own hair was long for years. Then I became obsessed with chopping it off, and I did, clear up to my ears. If hair is beauty, then I am no longer beautiful. Sylvia was beautiful, wasn't she? And like all of us, didn't she wield her beauty like a weapon? And then she married and laid it down. And when she was betrayed and took it up again, it was a word weapon, a poem sword. In the dream, I fasten her braid to my own hair at my nape. I walk outside with it through the world of men, swinging it behind me like a tail. And wow, and it is done in little couplets, I guess you would call that. Uh, except for the last one. Is this a sonnet? No, it's not a sonnet. So many of hers are sonnets, but they're kind of weird sonnets.
Mm-hmm. I think it's just couplets. I didn't
Yes.
think about whether it was a sonnet, but
Well, there's 17 lines, and the last one is a single line. Um, but yeah, this book, by the way, readers or listeners, is full of really fascinating sonnets. This won the Pulitzer Prize, by the way. Uh, okay, let's start. Why don't you tell us why you chose this particular poem?
I think there are a lot of people who gravitate to this poem. And one reason I think this poem speaks to something that Diane Seuss does a lot as a poet, which is talk about lineage, in particular, poetic lineage for women, which, when you talked earlier about her book drawing on different things, Amy Winehouse and Rembrandt, she I feel this. I can't speak for a lot of people who love her, but I think a lot of women writers, we were taught since we were girls to throw away our opinions. I mean, if I think about my history as a person expressing an opinion, so often you were told that's stupid, you're too emotional, that's not valid. And she undercuts all of that. She doesn't give a fuck. Diane Seuss is transgressive. She said she was rock and roll, and so she shares, this spoke to me, this spoke to me, this speaks to me, this is poetic for me. And I think so many of us embrace her work because we're like, yeah, I didn't put that in my poetry because I was ashamed of that. love that I had, or I was ashamed of this obsession. And she brings all of it in. And so I think this poem in particular is about a lineage with Plath, who's a poet who is an ancestor for many of us for so many reasons. It's also a poem about dream, and it's a poem about beauty.
For sure. And it's a poem about being a woman in a man's world and being defiant and going through that world, swinging that braid like a tail. I mean, there's just something so strong about that. And man, she can do it. Let's remind our listeners a little bit about Plath. When she says in here, when she was betrayed, I'm assuming that is finding out that Ted Hughes, her husband at the time, was having an affair.
Yeah, Ted Hughes betrayed her. I actually just finished this book, Asia, this gorgeous book by poet Sandra Simons about the poet that he left Plath for, who also killed herself and her child. But there's a book, a biography
Can we
of Plath.
just pause on that? She killed
Mhm.
herself and her child. I mean,
Second, yes, Asia did. Yeah.
just incredible. And I can't imagine how Ted Hughes must have felt that his two ex-wives killed themselves. One killed her child. I mean, was he a monster? Oh, my God. What do we know
Yeah.
about Hughes that that can
Yeah.
put some sort of footnote to this?
Yeah. I don't even want to talk about him because I don't find him that interesting as a person. I think her betrayal, there is this incredible biography, Red Comet. I think it's the best Plath biography I've read it. You've heard of it, maybe you've read it.
Oh, I
And
would love to.
it does her justice in a way I've never seen before, because when she commits suicide, she is about to be taken and institutionalized against her will. And the first time she's institutionalized, what she undergoes is really torture. She was tortured, and part of her suicide is that she has no way of avoiding this physical torture, and she's abandoned in that apartment. She's sick. Her thumb is cut. She has an infection. Her kids, I believe, have colds. So there's this drain that is, every woman identifies with it, I think, especially women who have had kids. Even if you're not a single mom, you identify with single motherhood on some level because of the labor that you do when you're alone with sick kids. And of course, for her, this is multiplied by that era for women. That she was overwhelmed, because I don't think of her as suicidal. I think of her as courageous and strong. And I think this particular biography really gets at the forces that were acting on her. And he did betray her also, yeah. Ted Hughes.
Wow. Okay. Well, let's look at this poem a little bit. Let's walk inside it a little bit. Some women make a pilgrimage to visit. Is it true? I mean, I didn't check this. Is Sylvia Plath's Braid actually at the Indiana Library?
It is. I've never been to Indiana.
Yeah.
It's actually her braids from when she was 13 years old, and
Oh,
her mother cut them and saved them. Yeah. I've seen pictures of it. I've never been, but neither has Seuss, I don't think. She saw the braid in her dream.
great. And it sounds like there are two braids, but she made it one so that she could wear it as a tail in her dream anyway. Um, yeah, that voice is so interesting in here. How it's almost like this casual conversational. Um, there's one moment in particular. She says, "Sylvia was beautiful, wasn't she?" You know, and she's not really addressing the reader. She's just sort of thinking out loud there. But yeah, it's a very conversational voice. I didn't drive to it. I dreamed it. The thick braid roped over my hands, heavier than lead. What do you do with that line? I think I have an idea, but I'm curious. Why is the braid heavier than lead?
I have a lot of feelings about that line. I have two really. The first one is what I was speaking before about the burden of her legacy, which is her pain that women carry, that we carry from her life and her work, and wondering, could things have been different? Could she have been free from that heaviness? It also, for me, though, there's something, and maybe I'm putting some of this into the poem, which is what you do when you read poems. But I think because she has the word pilgrimage, and then there's this heaviness, and also it's heavier than lead, and it's roped. And it evoked for me these sculptures you see like in medieval cathedrals in France, where you have the carved body of the saint, and inside the coffin, that's like a stone coffre. It's like got their bones or their form, and people go to visit it. But on the surface, you have this stone representation of the saint. And it reminded me of this kind of archaic pilgrimage where you're going to something that's institutional and it's revered. And I feel like partly in the poem, she rejects that. She rejects the visit to the museum. She rejects that it's fixed, that it's lead, that it's heavy. And she frees it. She frees it to wear, but I think she also frees Sylvia. Like the braid becomes beyond something encased in a box for people to touch, for people to look at. It becomes something more organic. And it's connected to female power, I think, when she wears it, because it's almost like she, maybe I'm putting too much here, but the pilgrimage part feels like very old world, religious, patriarchal relic.
Yeah.
And then when she wears it like an animal, it strikes me as very female, pagan, like close to the ground. And I think this kind of deity that's an animal moving through the world. I think that's one of my favorite parts of that poem.
So remind us how she committed suicide.
So she had her children with her in the apartment, so they were asleep. She rose early. She actually put, I don't know if it was cloth or towels under the door, because she killed herself by gas, by using the oven.
Yeah.
It's sort of a famous, she laid her head in the oven.
The reason I ask is the idea that this braid is a rope, and even though she didn't hang herself, maybe there's that echo of suicide there. The thick braid roped over my hand, heavier than lead. I mean, I'm seeing a rope. Gosh, maybe even a whip. This
I mean,
thick braided rope.
I don't know if have you ever seen the photos of Plath with her braids wreathed around her head?
Maybe, yeah, maybe.
So they were very, I mean, when you see them in pictures, they almost look like they're pinned on. They're these thick,
Okay.
heavy, and she wore them like a wreath.
Uh-huh.
But I do think that the rope and the heavy lead is connected to, I mean, it's connected to her death, and I think beyond that.
Sure. And so the poem also becomes about hair and the meaning of hair, the various ways we can think about it, especially as a woman. She did have long hair, and then she became with chopping it off. What I get from that is that more of that defiance, that I'm not going to I'm not going to acquiesce to what men find to be beautiful, which often is long hair, which I've never understood myself. But uh, and then, I mean, my God, if hair is beauty, then I am no longer beautiful. Ooh, that's painful. That's painful.
It is or it isn't. I saw her read once and she read a poem. I hope this was a poem, maybe it was an interview, where she says that she has given up trying to be beautiful,
Yeah.
that it's a burden.
But isn't it interesting in her newest book? I assume that's her on the cover, and she never. I mean, you never see her looking like that. You more typically see her uh, looking like that, which is, sort of, I don't know how to describe it. What's going on though? This shocked me when I saw that cover. It seemed like
Oh,
not at all.
I think it's a question of time. I think she's very young in that first photo on modern poetry.
Okay.
And we, whether this is true or not, our beauty fades with age in our conception of what beauty is. Um, and if beauty is power, if it's a power for women, which is something else we'll probably talk about, um, women are destined to lose one of the only forms of power that they have. And I think Diane Seuss, when she was talking about giving up beauty, she's rejecting that whole premise. You don't need the male gaze. She's like, I don't need to be beautiful. Why do you need to be beautiful? Or it kind of reminds me, there's this Margaret Atwood said something, I heard her say something, the last thing to give up is the need for love. And I think these are two messages that women are given. You're supposed to be loved, you're supposed to be beautiful. And the question, why? Maybe, and this is such a radical this was such a radical concept for me to hear. And it's so freeing because there's clearly so much else going on in life than beauty. I mean, that kind of beauty.
Right. And you mentioned gaze. That's something else that is throughout this book. I mean, the very title of it. What do we do with a painting? We gaze at it, and there's a lot of whether you call it a trope or whatever. The gaze is very much something that works through this book of poems. Uh, didn't she wield her beauty like a weapon? Then she married and laid it down. What did she lay down?
I mean, she gave up her power because I think in this,
Yeah.
I think this idea of marriage, certainly for someone like Ted Hughes, it's about,
Submission.
yeah, and it's about having. And once you have it, it's a very unevolved idea of love. But once it's so funny. It's going to sound really off topic, but yesterday I looked out my kitchen window and this just never happens. I saw a fox running through my yard, a little red fox. And when you see a fox, there's like that kind of, I don't know, I think it's one of the most beautiful creatures. And I said to my husband, I said, I saw a fox, I saw a fox. And he said, it's my Texan husband. He said, isn't it weird how in the 70s, people used to call women foxy or she was a fox? He goes, that's such a strange thing. And I thought, is it strange? Because what do we want to do with a fox, like in legend and myth and in life, with farmers and people are trying to snare a fox, capture a fox, keep a fox from using its wildness, its cleverness, from having its free spirit. And I think this old version that's been inherited by women that Sylvia certainly inherited. I mean, she was the thing she did for Ted Hughes, she sent out his work. She typed up his work at the expense of her own work.
She was
I
so much
guess
better of a poet than he was too.
I know we have to say this. I don't think everyone thinks that in England, but she's the better poet. Like there's no comparison.
No.
There's not even, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
This is also off topic, sorry, but we have a fox that lives in our neighborhood here. And have you heard a fox scream at night?
I have.
It's
Yeah,
horrifying. The
it
first
is.
time you hear it, you don't know what it is. Okay. So yeah, she laid down her power. She was betrayed, took it up again, and took it up again. It was a word weapon, a poem sword. Wow. So her power went from beauty to poems, to being a poet. Is that what's going on there?
Yeah, I think that's what that's about. It's about the power of creation.
Mhm.
And
A
that is the kind of beauty, right?
poem sword. I mean, wow, that's powerful. In the dream, and so that's what's interesting about her, as you mentioned earlier, the way it kind of seems to go off in different directions, but then it all ends up coming back. And I've almost forgotten that this was a dream at this point. And then she says, "In the dream, I fastened her braid to my own hair." Okay, we're back to the beginning. At my nape. Now, I think it's not coincidental that it's her nape. What do you think about that?
What do you think about that?
Significance of nape. And nape rhymes with rape. Nape sounds sexual. It's not just neck. She could have said, I fastened her braid to my own hair at my neck or at the back of my neck. But nape is just a really charged, loaded word for me.
Yeah. I mean, I love it. I don't even have an interpretation. I think it's a line that resists.
Yeah,
Resists.
yeah.
There's a kind of bareness to it, and vulnerability,
Yeah.
even though it's evoking power.
I want
Um,
I want
it
to look up
it's
nape.
it's close
Sorry.
to animal. I know. I have an OED behind me. I could get
Oh,
that out.
great. Yeah. Uh, the nape is the back of the neck. It's the area where hair is typically tied back or styled. So it makes sense. But I'm going to stick by it until I prove myself wrong. I think it's a charged word. I think she used that word purposely. And again, maybe because it rhymes with rape or because there's something, to me anyway, sort of sensual about it that you don't get from just the word neck. But anyway, to be continued on that. I'll check that out. I walk outside. Here comes the moment of Diane Seuss standing up and saying "fuck you." I walk outside with it through the world of men, swinging it behind me like a tail. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. What a what a fascinating poem. Thank you so much for directing me to this poem. Anything else you want to say about it? There's so much here.
Um, well, I think there is something, I don't know if I've much more to add about this, but there is something about the dream in her work. She has dreams in her work a lot, and the fact that we're in the world of men. And there's this possibility, if we abandon beauty through the male gaze and we abandon these rules that we've inherited about what gives things value, and what lineage we should look at. There's also this idea that the dream is as much of life as the non-dream, that what occurs there is also real and powerful.
Yeah.
And this is an aside that's very strange, but sometimes I dream about poets. And I had a dream about Diane Seuss once this year when I was reading modern poetry. And, I'll read someone's book and then I start dreaming about them if I like the book too much. And in the dream, she was 6 feet tall and I gave her a glass heart.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Uh, this is sort of interesting. My most recent poem came out of a dream about a poet, and it involves a fox. Uh,
Oh,
in the dream, I meet Wallace Stevens in the lobby of the Hartford Insurance Building and have a very strange exchange. But at the end of the poem, he shapeshifts into a fox and disappears down a hole in the lobby floor.
That's amazing.
Oh man, dreams are so important for poems, and also I think you're right. I think it's a third of our life, mental
Mhm.
activity, a third of our life, and just to dismiss it. I remember someone saying many years ago, some sort of academic discussion about what dreams are, and someone said, "Oh, it's just we're just purging ourselves of all the experiences we had during the day that somehow build up, and that's our way of purging it." I don't think so. I think it's a lot more important than that, for sure.
Yeah, certainly poets don't think that.
Hey, I want you to finish this conversation by reading this poem. But before we do, let me ask you a little bit about your poetry. Um, you have a new book coming out, but not for a while. What can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, it's coming out in 2027, which I kind of also the year I'm going to retire. So I'm hoping I can
Nice.
devote some attention to its release. It's called Feral, speaking of the animal, and it has a couple cats in it. And I don't know what else to say about it, except it's it's kind of raw, also raw, very feminine poems, which and I hope it has power, because it has certainly has a lot of sadness, but I hope it has equal parts power.
Well, I will put a link in the show notes to your webpage so that people can check you out. One question, one more question about you. I always want to ask poets this. Uh, how old were you when you first seriously said, "I'm a poet"?
Seriously, I think I was 11.
Really,
And
that young?
I had this sixth grade teacher in Geneva, New York. Her name was Mrs. Perry, and she was wondrous. I loved her. I loved my teachers. I mean, there were teachers I didn't love, but when I loved a teacher, I really loved my teacher. And she did a poetry unit. She was a science person. She was a scientist. But you know, at middle school, you'll have a teacher teach you like 3 subjects. And she had us reading poems and writing poems. And I remember I was in a car driving to Syracuse, and my mom said, "We're going to move here." And I was so happy because I really hated where I lived. And I felt so much joy, but I didn't express things that I felt. I kept my feelings were very internal. And so I wrote this poem in my head, and then I went home and I hand wrote it out and I brought it to Mrs. Perry. And maybe this she like blessed me in this way, but she said, "Oh, you're a poet." And it felt so good. And it felt such a it just finding reaching inside into that mess and then using language to do something was so satisfying. And then to share it is part of it. It's not just making it, it's sharing it.
Yeah. I don't know why this is, but I've had no problem my whole life calling myself an artist. If someone said, "Are you an artist?" Yes, artist. Are you a songwriter? Yes. And that's one of the things I do, by the way. I'm a singer-songwriter, and I play a lot of gigs, have recorded music out there. Yeah, I'm a songwriter. Are you a poet? Something, for some reason, sticks there that makes me want to go, I write poems, but am I a poet? It just seems like such a grand thing to me. And I think it's my own little hang up. I think, as I've said before on this, in one of these episodes, it's time for me to let that go and be okay with calling myself a poet.
I get it. I mean, poet feels it's painter, musician, they all have a professional, but poet feels connected to something prophetic and unprofessional because there's no money. which is why we love it, I think. I don't tell people I'm a poet. I'm trying to work on that also, even though I have all these books.
Yeah, I mean, clearly you
I,
are.
but I've been like in living this secret life at work, and I
Like
don't,
Wallace Stevens, by the way.
yeah,
People at his office had no idea that he wrote poems, let alone at the time he was one of the most revered poets in America. That's so strange. Well, poetry, we're going a little far afield here, but that's okay. Poetry, I don't think there's anything else that is both so sort of ignored and assumed it's not important by so many people. And at the same time, anytime there's a wedding, there's going to be poetry. Anytime there's a funeral, there's going to be poetry. Anytime we have some event like 9/11, there's going to be poetry. So it's almost like it's this thing that's not respected or ignored by the vast majority of people, but then they call on it when they need it.
yeah.
It's
I've been asked for a poem for all of those things. I've written a poem for a wedding. I've been asked for a bar mitzvah. I've been asked to bring a poem to a funeral.
yeah.
I mean, we need it. It is, it's like, yeah.
And that's why I'm doing this podcast because I think we especially need it now.
Yeah, I actually would, something you said made me think about the poem, and I stopped myself, but I think we resist these things that make us, especially in a man's world, which I think you'd agree, we're still in a man's world. It's certainly reasserting the manness of it.
More
But I
so
think
than ever lately.
that's right. And I think there's something in poetry which evokes what is so vulnerable, and which is what beauty does, which is why people are scared of beauty and why men, right, we're humbled in the face of beauty, but beauty breaks you open. It breaks the ego apart because you're humbled in front of something else. And I think that's why, one, when women are beautiful, men want to like the fox, they want to capture it
Own
and
it.
contain it and own it and subdue it, to subdue that emotion in the person, to control this part of you that is moved, that wants to weep, that is drawn in with awe like a child. And I think these things are really connected to this kind of masculinity that's so destructive. And what poems do, they're at odds.
Well, Jessica Cuello, I knew this would be a great conversation. I admire you a lot, and I would love for you to take us out by reading this poem.
Okay. Self-portrait with Sylvia Plath's Braid. Some women make a pilgrimage to visit it in the Indiana library, charged to keep it safe. I didn't drive to it. I dreamed it. The thick braid roped over my hands, heavier than lead. My own hair was long for years. Then I became obsessed with chopping it off, and I did, clear up to my ears. If hair is beauty, then I am no longer beautiful. Sylvia was beautiful, wasn't she? And like all of us, didn't she wield her beauty like a weapon? And then she married and laid it down. And when she was betrayed and took it up again, it was a word weapon, a poem sword. In the dream, I fasten her braid to my own hair at my nape. I walk outside with it through the world of men, swinging it behind me like a tail.
Beautiful. Diane Seuss. This is the book. Jessica Cuello, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I wish you all the best, and look forward to your next volume. Yeah, I'll let you know when this episode comes out.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.